I'm Heather.
And I'm Desiree.
And you're listening to
the Perpetually Overdue Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perpetually Overdue Podcast. I'm Heather.
I'm Desiree.
And this week's episode, we decided to do a deep dive, which we will do more of in the future on various different subjects. But the subject that we chose for today's episode is astrology. Ooh. We don't have any sound effects, but if we did, there would be some like chimes or something to signify the celestial bodies in the air. Now, Desiree and I each have our relationship with astrology. Mm-hmm. I will say that when I was younger, the only knowledge of astrology that I have is what most of us have, which is horoscopes in the back of magazines.
Oh, man.
Yes. And because I want to tread lightly because I don't know the writers that do the horoscopes, but I would venture to say that you don't have to be an astrologer to do those. They're very generalized, and because they're very generalized, a lot of people read it, don't relate to it, throw it out the window. Astrology is hogwash. Especially because there's not a lot that we know or are taught about astrology. And if you were Christians, like me and Desiree were, then you were told that astrology is of the devil. Yes. Which I kind of get after doing the deep dive and doing some research, because apparently the cradle of astrology, or where it all started, is with the earliest civilizations. So you have Sumerians, which is the earliest known civilization. You also have Babylonians. And if you know anything about Babylonians in the Bible, they're bad. They're soothsayers. They're occultists. They're just bad people. So we were taught to associate anything that is Babylon related as bad. So I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but the Chaldeans from Babylonia, which according to my research is about 9th to 6th century BCE, is kind of where everything started with astrology, or at least as far back as what we know, because we're discovering things all the time. So in that time, supposedly, this people group knew about the sun, they knew about the moon, and at least 5 other planets, which is quite impressive.
Honestly.
Because they did not have telescopes, they did not have the technology that we do. And so for them to be able to identify these celestial bodies, which I think that every ancient civilization had some sort of fascination with the sky and with stars and planets and things like that. So after that little history and my own personal take on it, I am starting to learn more about astrology. Desiree actually is somebody that has sort of introduced me to it in a way with her own takes on it and with telling me about what is going on in the sky that I'm not aware of. You know, the joke about like Mercury's in the microwave kind of thing. To signify retrograde. So I feel like you're a little bit more knowledgeable about it. When did your relationship with astrology start to change? Because I think that you had the same sort of upbringing or understanding of astrology as I did.
Yeah.
Just like the horoscopes, and that's it.
Yeah, pretty much. When I was younger, it's wild to think that there could be listeners who have no understanding of physical magazines.
And how? Oh my God, I haven't even thought of that.
Yeah, I know.
No, they're still in supermarkets. I still see them.
No one buys them anymore.
No, it's
especially not the younger people.
It's true. Nobody buys them.
When we were younger, those were big deals. Like,
yeah.
I mean, any fashion news, any celebrity news, any makeup news, anything of pop culture, we had to physically buy magazines. Like, the urgency to get the latest out there on the next edition was, you know, a bigger thing then than it is now, because now news is constantly at our fingertips by the second, but that wasn't the case growing up. So collecting these magazines, and all of these magazines providing some form of horoscope in the back was just a tradition. It was a thing we all did and partook.
Yeah.
Even if we had absolutely no fucking clue what horoscope, astrology, half of us got astronomy and astrology confused. We didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So that was definitely my upbringing. And then obviously we became Christian. And like Heather said, it was very much demonized as do not touch, taboo, which is ironic because at the same time, even within our community, we would secretly still look for those horoscopes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Still was reading them, for sure.
Exactly. So then, obviously, if you've listened to our previous episodes about our history with religion, it wasn't until my late 20s that I walked away from all that. I would say when I started getting curious was probably just more in my mid 30s. And then eventually, once 2020 hit, and everyone started kind of talking about tarot and spirituality through metaphysical aspects, or people who label it woo-woo, which I hate that term so much. And I didn't even know about that term until later after being in it for a while.
Really?
Yeah, I had never come across that term until at least like 3 years into my own journey. And I was like, what? I was like, people call it this? And then I realized people were definitely labeling it as a mockery thing. So yeah, so it wasn't until then that slowly but surely, not fully intentionally researching, but just getting nuggets of information throughout time and just building my collection of knowledge in that area.
It's interesting because there was a resurgence of the metaphysical, a resurgence of a lot of occultic practices or esoteric practices that have always been stigmatized. It felt like collectively we were like, okay, we're done with that. We're done with being told that it's wrong, that it's not viable, all of this stuff, especially because it's like, okay, so looking at the stars and the planets and their relationship to what happens on Earth and their relationship to what happens in our lives, which is, by the way, all that astrology is the relationship between these three things, is less viable than a man who, after dying, was magically resurrected after 3 days. I'm not saying that that couldn't have happened. What I'm saying is we are accepting of this, but not accepting of that. And if I've learned anything, especially through conspiracy theories, because I love a good conspiracy theory, there was one documentary that I watched and it was about aliens. And this is before the government announced that aliens were real. And it was a lot of former government workers who talked about a lot of the cover-ups, a lot of people in the military, in the Air Force having encountered UFOs and how it was covered up and what was going on behind the scenes in the Pentagon and yada yada. So they showed a lot of documentation. Of course, some things were redacted for protection. They had a lot of people give their first-hand experiences with UFOs, like old fighter pilots that were now retired, different things like that. They talked in this documentary about how there was a very strategic effort by the government to diminish stories of people who had encountered UFOs or other life forms by poking fun of it, by making fun of it in media, through talk shows, through movies, through books. Anyone that claimed that they had an encounter or saw a UFO was seen as being crazy, absurd. And then the government comes out and they're like, yeah, aliens are real. And unfortunately, even though that happened, it's still the stigma of all the years that those things were covered up, all of the years that they were explained away by some rational explanation, all of the years that they basically made people look like fools, that doesn't just go away overnight. So I do feel like, unfortunately, the same goes with the metaphysical, with things like astrology and with tarot and things of that nature. We accept Jesus and his story. We accept the idea that prophecy exists, which is just, by the way, telling of the future. But it has to be done in this capacity to be valid. And if it's not done in this capacity, then it's like you said, it's woo-woo. And I had heard the term woo-woo come up when that resurgence of the metaphysical started to happen. And unfortunately, it's still kind of around, and it's still something that people don't know a lot of. And because they don't know a lot of and they refuse to actually look into it, they just go with what their pastors tell them or what society is telling them. Then they just kind of join in on the stigma of like, oh, that's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, all these years later, the government is like, oh yeah, aliens are real. And now all of a sudden, all those people that we looked at sideways, they don't seem as crazy as they were. I just want to challenge people out there that are listening or watching to just open up your mind if you've never considered astrology, and just to take what we say and do your own research, learn about it. Because regardless of whether you believe that there is a connection, I think that there's still value in opening up your mind and taking in new experiences. Not to mention that there is scientific proof that at the very least, the celestial bodies above us do affect what happens on this earth. Very simple explanation: the moon affects the tides. So we can accept that. We can accept that the moon affects the tides, but we can't accept that there could be more going on, even though our ancient ancestors understood that. And these are the people who built pyramids. These are the people who had advanced technology that still to this day we don't fully understand. And yet we fail to learn from them and what they put their time and energy into, which a lot of it was astronomy, astrology. I mean, mathematics, the way that we know it now, was built off of ancient civilizations. So all that to say, just have an open mind about it, because even I, in doing a deep dive and doing research, became utterly fascinated by astrology. And it was something that I was exposed to mostly through TikTok and Instagram, but on a very minor scale of like, Virgo, this is what's going on, and blah, 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 blah. Which is difficult because, again, it's just like a digital version of a horoscope. So it's all of these generalizations that are not really, if I can dare to say, true astrology the way that it was meant to be, because the way that it was meant to be was more on an individualistic basis, because it's based on your natal chart. Yeah. So can you explain what a natal chart is for maybe people who don't understand what it is?
So, to put it simply, when we're born obviously at a certain time. And at that time, and on that day specifically, the placements in the sky, the planets, constellations, all these things were aligned specifically at certain degrees on that day that and moment you were born. And so pretty much what astrologers are doing is they're taking that picture of the sky, what it looked like the moment you were born, and pretty much going, okay, here are all the degrees of every planet where it stood that moment you came into this earth and you breathed your first breath. And so now we're going to break down basically those degrees and alignments to figure out pretty much a picture of your life and your essence and who you are and potentially your purpose. And if you believe in it, probably past life, karmic things that happened, if you believe there, want to even go there. There are so many layers that could possibly be discovered through your chart, and you don't have to fully believe in all of it. Even just like at the basic level, there is so much you can learn and take from it.
And your natal chart is 100% unique. Even if you're a twin, even if you're a triplet, you're not born at the exact same minute. So even with those natal charts, you are going to have differences, deviations. And because they're unique, every person, even if you share a sign, like I'm a Virgo, if I meet another Virgo, we're not going to have the exact same natal chart. We're not going to have the exact same personality. There will be universal characteristics that could apply to us. But once I read my natal chart, I felt way more in tune with astrology, because I was like, oh, this is way beyond a horoscope. This is telling me very key characteristics about who I am internally, but also the influences. Because one thing that I did learn in my research is that it's not fortune telling, it's not prophecy. All it is it's telling you influences that you can choose to or not choose to take advantage of.
Yeah. And to say, because I can already hear some people going, well, every person who was born at the same time as I was, yeah, but you were all born in different locations, and that also plays a factor. So
Yes.
It's not even just the fact that you were born on this day at this time. Where you were born also affects, like the city you were born in, the hospital, all that. So there are a lot of factors that go into making your natal chart very personal to you.
Exactly. And what I find really, really interesting about that is that the natal chart is what it is, right? The tool that astrologers would use in order to basically see where the planetary positions are and like what the mathematical alignments are between the celestial bodies in that exact moment, it's called an ephemeris. And fun fact, NASA actually publishes the calibrated position of the planets for yearly and monthly ephemeris. It's still something that we use to this day. So there's a big intersection between astrology and astronomy. And I get a lot of people will be like, well, that's astronomy. But what pulls it into the astrology realm is that then people would interpret that ephemeris with astrological texts, ancient texts. And that's how we get, like, this is how your personality is, and this is what you're apt for, and this is maybe what your love life could look like, or what you maybe are looking for in a partner, and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? Now, there is a small room for error in the sense that even if you have a birth certificate like I do that has the location of where I was born, the day and the time, you also have people like my husband who was born in a bathroom. So he doesn't have his time of birth. He knows where he was, he knows the day, he doesn't know the time. So without that bit of knowledge, his natal chart may not be as accurate as, let's say, mine was, which is more closely related to exactly down to the minute when I was born. Keep that in mind as well when you're looking at your natal chart and you're like, because I feel like people look at it and go, oh, this is not 100% accurate, let's just throw it all out. I would say that my natal chart was like 98% accurate.
Yeah.
There was only like maybe one or two things that I was like, I don't know. And again, we're constantly changing and evolving as human beings.
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't apply to you right now, but if you revisit it in 10 years, maybe this is like something that you're like, oh my gosh. Because we're always discovering things about ourselves.
Yes.
And how we are and our nature. And sometimes we can have something in front of us that tells us about our nature of something that we have not yet discovered.
I will encourage and say that if you do reach out to astrologers to read your chart, don't take one answer as final. If you're able to, have multiple people who claim to be astrologers to read your chart, because at the end of the day, just like with anything, human error or just people who are still learning. And also listen to your intuition, because if something doesn't feel right and something just doesn't align with you at all, don't feel like you have to accept it and then mold your life to fit around that, because if it doesn't feel right, listen to that.
Also, understand, again, this is not fortune telling, this is not prophecy. No astrologer is going to be like, this is who you're going to marry at this time, and no, they shouldn't be anyway. Because again, they're interpreting. So if you are leery of contacting an astrologer, learn about it yourself. There is so much information out there.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So you can learn about the houses, about the planets, about the glyphs that go along with your particular sign, the meaning behind it. All of that information is available to you. And so you can look at your own chart and interpret it yourself if you want to.
Most of the online places where you can just put in your information and get your birth chart, they pretty much break it down a lot for you. Even each house and all that stuff. So they do very much make it easier for you to kind of get a glimpse.
But what was so fascinating, now moving from natal charts kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, is that horoscopes, the way that we knew them growing up, like the Western horoscopes, that actually didn't even originate here in the West. They originated in North Africa and West Asia. At least that version, because there's many different types of astrology, and we'll get into that. But they were more specific to your particular chart, your placements, everything like that. It wasn't like this very generalized, which is what they do now. And it's understandable because if you're going to put it in the back of the magazine, anybody can buy that magazine.
Yeah.
And if so, they're going to have to come up with some very generalized horoscopes for your particular sign that may or may not apply to your life. And if this is all you have to go on as far as astrology, I can understand why you would throw it out the window. But ancient horoscopes used to be based on your specific birth chart. And not just on like an algorithm or whatever that a lot of them use. So the way that we, and when I say we, I mean not just Desiree and I, but like many generations know horoscopes, is not the way that it was originally done. So keep that in mind when you're, I was going to say flipping through a magazine, but nobody's doing that. But when you're online or when you see a Instagram or a TikTok and they're saying your particular sign and they're giving you this information and it's not resonating with you, understand that it's generalizations. It's not specific to you, the location, the day, the time of when you were born and how your planets were aligned. And something that Desiree brought up is that your base sign is not all that there is to you. In fact, there are other aspects of your natal chart that actually might have more control over how you are personality-wise.
So you have to keep in mind that when you were born, again, there was a lot happening celestially, that it wasn't just referencing the season and sign you were born in. There are many other planets and even other signs that correlate with that time that you were born in. So for example, if you've ever heard people talk about their ascending sign or ascendant sign, that is your rising sign. There are many different ways to name it that you maybe hear about it. And ironically, most people that aren't within really deep diving into astrology or the metaphysical, they don't realize your ascending sign actually almost has more to do with who you are than even just your sun sign, which is the sign that we all say we were born in. Heather was born in Virgo. I was born as Sagittarius in December. And so your ascending is your rising sign. Then there's your moon sign. Then there's even your Venus. And so you have different aspects. For example, your ascending sign is usually known as more who you're becoming, who you put forth in the world, what's your purpose. Whereas your sun sign has a lot to do with like your inner self and all the aspects that makes you intimately who you are, that isn't easily accessible to the outside world. Your moon sign deals with a lot of your internal emotions. And then you have your Venus sign that deals usually with love in general. It's not just your love life romantically, but just how you approach love relationships.
Yeah,
and
totally.
So, yeah, there's a lot that makes up who you are.
There is a lot. And I'm a Virgo. So my rising is also a Virgo. But I will say that there have been times when I've seen Virgo stereotypes that I don't personally relate to. But when I started doing a deep dive into astrology and learning about earth signs and learning about Virgo, a lot of the stereotypes are not, I don't want to say misinterpreted, but they're not the essence of who that sign is. So like with Virgo, it's very like control, neatness kind of thing. I am a neat person. And there was a time in my life that control, I think for everybody, honestly, was something that I aspired to have mostly as like a survival mechanism. Because if I had control, then I could maybe dictate how certain outcomes would happen to prevent myself from being hurt or to prevent myself from being disappointed. It didn't really have to do with the fact of like, oh, I just need to be in control because I like to control other people. And so when you kind of make blanket statements like that, that not everybody relates to, then you have a lot of people turned off by astrology because people are more fed into sort of the stereotypes of what those signs are. So for Virgo, one of the things that I do really, really relate to, and we'll talk about it in another later episode where we get into the earth signs, the air signs, the water signs, and we do a deep dive into each one of those, is adaptability. My sign is very adaptable. And I can say, looking back on my life, that that is very true of who I am. I am able to easily adapt to situations. I'm able to adapt to places, to people, and many different things. So that is more of the essence of what I've learned of who Virgo is versus, oh, you're just the control freak. Because people who like and want control are usually not adaptable because adapting requires change. So
which is interesting because that Virgo is a mutable sign. And
exactly.
Again, things we'll deep dive into later on when we get into mutable and fixed and cardinal signs. It makes sense that related to her because she is a mutable sign.
So all that to say is that there's so much more to astrology than like TikTok videos and reels or your horoscopes that you find online. And we would encourage everyone to look at your natal chart if you're able to do so, because again, there are people that may not know all that information. But as far as astrology goes, it's definitely gotten a bad rap.
Yes.
And there are things that we definitely want to address here in this episode as far as the contributions of astrology, because
throughout all of our history,
it really is way more than even I understood and knew at the time, but it has a very rich history. I mean, the study of astrology led to so many developments in other scientific fields because at one point, astronomy and astrology were very closely linked. So you have developments in astronomy, in chemistry, in mathematics, in botany, and medicine that came out of astrology. And that's not something that you really hear about because, again, it's very woo-woo. And the only reason why it's woo-woo and considered to be part of like esoteric is because there's an element of it that you can't necessarily see. But we've already learned, even in science, that there is the possibility of multiple dimensions and that there could be a dimension that is taking place simultaneously with ours that is not visible to us. It doesn't make it any less valid or real. Just because we are not able to tap into it with maybe all of our senses doesn't mean that it's not happening. It's the same concept with people who see afterlife events. They see ghosts. There are mediums who speak with people who have passed, have extremely accurate information. But I think that there's always this skepticism and this desire to tear down anything that we ourselves cannot see, taste, hear, touch. It's wild to me because even Christianity, which is such a widely accepted religion, takes faith. I mean, in the Bible, it says, blessed are those who believe without seeing. So it takes a measure of faith and believing without seeing. And again, that's acceptable, but not all of this other stuff. And it was actually Christianity that gave astrology a bad rep. Early Christians who were like, oh, those Babylonians, they're dabbling in witchcraft. So anything that they do, even though they made many contributions, is bad. So astrology is bad. It's invalid. We don't believe in it, kind of thing.
And they tried to shut it down for a time, and there was a lull in astrology, but then it had a resurgence again because at the end of the day, it is very much woven into the fabric of civilization. At its very core, you can't just eliminate it because then you have to then deny everything else. Then you have to deny geometry. Then you're going to have to deny arithmetic and logic and grammar, even music. Had its foundation influenced by astrology, not even astronomy. And so it's something that, yes, of course, we've learned things as we've evolved as humans. And there are things that obviously changed. And we learned, oh, okay, maybe that's not exactly, but it made sense at the time what people thought. And, you know, between agricultural things and other aspects of belief. But at the end of the day, science will say that nothing has been proven per se. But then at the same time, again, so much of what it was and how it was created and understood throughout time influenced everything else that we know now, that science very much now establishes as set foundational thinking. I mean, just think about quantum physics. There's so much about that we can't see. There's things that it's difficult to understand because science can't practically show it to you. But there's a lot about what makes up Earth and us as people and atoms and all these different things that at the end of the day, if we were going by the logic that it has to be something we physically see to believe, then half of our existence won't make sense and we're going to throw it out in the garbage with everything else.
Yeah, and also science is constantly evolving.
Yes.
There are things that we know now that we didn't know 100 years ago, and there's going to be things that we know 100 years from now that we didn't know currently. So the fact that we can accept that science is an ever-evolving practice and discipline is a little unfair to astrology, because astrology also continues to evolve. Astronomy continues to evolve. Mathematics continue to evolve. We're discovering things all of the time. We're learning things all of the time. And so there has to be a little bit of grace that is given to all of these different disciplines, that we are working based off of the information that we have now. Not to mention, there is a physical aspect of astrology. You look up in the sky, you see stars, you see the moon, you see all these things. And like I said, we can accept that the moon affects the tides, but we can't accept that there may be other things that the planets and their alignment and the stars and all of those things affect as well. Not to mention that, like, if you're a creative, the 7 liberal arts as we know them today were based on astrology. You were talking about music. It kind of makes sense, because I feel like, and this might be a stereotype, it might be a blanket statement, but I'm going to make it anyway. I feel like creatives are more open to these types of ideas. And I don't know if that's the connection that we have with maybe music or art or whatever. The fact that it's so subjective, the fact that it is more about the emotional than the intellectual, even though we are still intellectual and logical creatures, but we're able to open ourselves up to more of the emotion of, like, a piece of music, the way that it makes us feel. It's not just about the technique or the arrangement, it's about the feeling that it invokes.
I think that also in part has to do with the fact that as artists, we are very much connected to the imagination and how much that is a huge factor in what we create. And the fact that to those who don't consider themselves creative, they can't fully even fathom the realization that creatives just go into their imagination and then create these things, what they believe is out of nowhere. And so I think that concept is potentially what helps creative people to be more open-minded to consciousness thinking and other things of that realm, because of the fact that they even have to tap into almost an unknown to create what they do.
That's a good point. I think too, when you open yourself up emotionally and you are moved so deeply by something, whether that be a piece of art or music or whatever, you start to ask other questions of how did this all come about, this beauty? Like, whenever I see natural beauty, that's something that pops up in my mind of, how did this get here? And yes, there are scientific aspects to that. You know, like the formation of the Grand Canyon came through wind and water. I feel like there's way more to it than just the scientific aspect of those things, which is why I think also we as individuals were attracted to religion and Christianity, because it gave a more spiritual, emotional explanation than just boom, accidentally we're here, you know? And that there was more of an intelligent design to creation, and intelligent design to us, and how we are interconnected with each other and how we're connected to nature, because the celestial bodies, that's part of nature. just as much as a mountain is, just as much as a river or a lake is. And it's interesting to me because so many different cultures have their forms of astrology in their way of looking up at the sky and interpreting. I mean, you have Native American, you have Celtic, you have Indian, you have African, you have Mesoamerican, Aztec, Mayan. We know this because we've seen their calendars, we've seen the different things that they've left behind that show us what their mentality was. And as somebody who went to Mexico and saw some Mayan ruins, it is amazing what these ancient people were able to do and how they knew, like, you could go all the way up one of these step pyramids to the very top. You're just like this little tiny ant. And if I stand in a very specific place, you can speak without yelling, just your normal volume, and I can hear you clearly. The knowledge of physics was well beyond their age. And they had such a, not only respect, but an understanding of how the different celestial bodies and different times affected their life. An example of that, because I know that I'm not explaining it super well. So in Egypt, there was something called the flooding of the Nile, and it would take place every year. And the Egyptians figured out that when a certain star named Sirius, and it was the brightest star, so I would assume, I didn't look into this, but I would assume that it was probably most likely the North Star. But they refer to it as Sirius. When it would appear in the east just before sunrise, which coincided with their summer solstice, which again, I think was purposefully done based on this, but that's when they knew that the waters were coming. That's when they knew that the flooding of the Nile would begin. And so they created this sort of calendar event called the flooding of the Nile based on this celestial body, this star. When it would be in a certain place in the sky, they knew what was about to happen. So again, it's not all how they refer to as woo-woo. But
I mean, if you think about it, it was astronomy, but at an agricultural sense of how it affects people and the earth. Astrology. It's pretty much, again, they're almost
very
like
closely
hand
related.
in hand, very closely related, because you're taking the understanding of the sky and space from how we see it here on Earth, but we are also aligning it with what it does align with. It just naturally aligns with seasons and different times of the year and different events of the year. And agriculturally, it's a lot of how people interpreted things. So, you know, like you said, people have looked at astrology in this one woo-woo horoscope essence, when it is so much more. And I was going to say earlier, when it comes to astrology, it's a fact of learning about it and accepting it to a certain extent. Doesn't mean you have to make it your whole personality. It's just something that you can take in informationally, that it is fact, and there are facts aligning with it. Just like, again, aliens, this one thing that we were told our whole lives and for decades was wrong and was a lie. So really, who are we to trust the authorities that tell us these things are not real, when clearly, if there is history and evidence backing up certain topics for centuries, then it is something that I think we should pay attention to. Again, not needing to make it your whole belief system or personality, but I think it doesn't hurt to go, this is a part of civilization history. Just accepting that and having that on a shelf of information, I don't think hurts.
I want to say two things. One, I think it's really hard for us to accept that ancient civilizations, because we have this idea of we're evolving, so we're past that. You know, we know more now than ancient people did back then. We don't know that for a fact, in the sense that we didn't come in contact with ancient civilizations to know what they knew. And if we do know more now than we did then, how is it that we're not able to explain certain phenomena like the pyramids? How is it that we're not able to recreate those things? So there is an aspect of learning from the past instead of just disregarding it as, oh, that's antiquated. That's uncivilized thought. People back then,
they were just hitting rocks together.
Exactly. And to be honest, media and even education hasn't helped us think of it any differently than that. Paleontologists and people that are in those types of fields that are utterly fascinated by ancient civilizations and how much they knew, even back then, without the same sort of technology and advancements that we have now, they have a better understanding of just how genius these ancient civilizations were. And if you actually visit some of these ruins and you see some of the things that they knew, how they built certain temples and rooms so that when the sun was in a certain place in the sky, it would go through this window. It's amazing. And it's something that people that lacked intelligence could not have done. They could not have created that. They could not have known that. And so obviously, if we're still looking at some of the things that they knew back then in mathematics, in physics, in medicine, and yes, we may have expounded upon those things, but they set the basis for it. How can we just disregard that? And again, I think it's easier for us to accept the astronomy aspect of astrology in the sense that we can accept that the flooding of the Nile happens when a certain star hits the east during this particular time of day. But it's difficult for us to then take that and say, oh, well, also these things could be affecting us personally. That they could actually have an influence, which again is what astrology is. It's about the influences. They could have an influence on us and on the world around us. And I think that it's a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe like a fear of lack of control of going, maybe I am not as sovereign as I think that I am and controlling everything around me and controlling my destiny, my will, and everything like that. That there could be things that are influencing me and influencing the decisions that I make and influencing who I am as a person. It's hard to accept that because we're such an individualistic society and we want to be our own person and we want to be unique. And to think that they're these, in our interpretation, non-sentient beings, the celestial bodies, that we don't interpret as having a soul or a consciousness, could have an influence on us and on the world around us and the things that happen here. It's a little unnerving to think. We're like, oh, Mercury is in retrograde. And now it's become kind of like a joke, right?
Yes.
But there's a certain dynamic and environment that happens when Mercury goes into retrograde, right? So you can have more of something, like maybe more conflict, maybe more of this or more of that. Not saying guaranteed it's going to be happening, but maybe it's more likely to happen than in other times. It's not that big of a stretch, you know what I mean? And especially knowing these things and actually taking it in and going, there could be influences around me. We know that environment influences us. We know that other people influence us. So why can't the celestial bodies that control a lot of the mechanics of how our Earth functions, like the tides, why can't they affect us as well?
I mean, think about women and their cycles. We are very much connected also to the moon and how that all functions because our bodies also link up to a certain rhythm of how it goes through this cycle with the moon. And we have different phases within the month's time that our bodies and our chemistry and our hormones get affected by. And they will react to certain things. Our emotions will shift. Our eating habits will shift. Our way of thinking. There's so much that gets affected in a person's body with a female reproductive system that very much ties into also the cycles of the moon and all these things.
And just to relay how integrated astrology is into even our modern society, because astrology, it's not just responsible for ancient developments. So we talked about astronomy, chemistry, mathematics, the liberal arts, like those things that were established in the past. It's permeated throughout art even today, throughout language, throughout literature. A perfect example, if you drive a Subaru in Japan means Pleiades, celestial bodies.
And Pleiades is actually a cluster of stars that is commonly known as the Seven Sisters. So it is a constellation of this star cluster. And fun fact, I've always been obsessed with it because I have a birthmark on my arm that if you looked closely is all these little tiny ones, and I always felt like it was a replication of the Seven Sisters, the Pleiades constellation. So
I love that.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, so in Japan, the movement of Pleiades would determine when they would plant their rice. So it's not just the word. And if you actually look at the Subaru logo, it's stars.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to have to look that up.
Yeah, because we used to have a Subaru. And so my husband, when I told him that fact, he was like, oh yeah, that's why the logo has stars. And I was like, oh shit. So again, astrology is very integrated. We just don't always know and recognize that what we're looking at, or, you know, maybe a word that we learned or an art form that we learned was influenced or based on astrology.
As it is when it comes to astrology, because of its very thick, rich history, there is so much.
I like the word thick.
There is so much that we honestly barely touched on it. Even the points we made could go way deeper, and we just kind of skimmed the surface of trying to explain how much astrology is a part of our lives, whether we accept it or see it or recognize it or not. Again, as we've said already, it very much created the foundation for a lot of things that we know now. Like Heather was saying earlier in the episode, it's something to say, just, keep an open mind and maybe get a little curious. Don't be the kidney bean guy. If you watched the earlier episode of Am I the Asshole? Don't be the kidney bean guy. And if you want to know what that means, you're going to have to go
watch the episode.
Yeah. Yes. Actually do your own research. And again, as we said, don't worry that you're going to become woo-woo all of a sudden. It doesn't have to be your whole personality. And as it is, I don't like the term woo-woo because I think it very much negates a lot of what metaphysics is, which again, a lot of metaphysics is backed by science too. So we're just here to say, maybe take a second look and see for yourself and just, maybe just a fun fact you can bring up at a dinner party.
Yeah. Honestly, the Subaru thing was really exciting for me.
I like that.
I will say too, calling something woo-woo makes it seem like it's devoid of intellectual thought. Just because you look into something doesn't mean that all your logic suddenly just escapes your brain. It doesn't work that way. You look at everything with a critical eye, with critical thinking, and yes, you listen to your emotions and how you feel about it, your inner guide, but you also don't just remove intelligent thought from that situation as well. Believe it or not, logic and spirituality can coexist with each other. And maybe this is something that you don't necessarily believe has an effect on you or has an effect to the degree of what we're talking about. But you can at least acknowledge the history, because that's pretty what we've dabbled in right now. We've just told you the basis of the history of astrology and how much it actually is integrated into our society and our everyday life, what it has contributed to many different fields that we look at as being legitimate when we don't feel the same way about astrology, and just sort of destigmatizing it a little bit, so that people that maybe are interested in it feel more confident stepping into it, and not like, oh, I can't because it's not real and it's just a bunch of woo-woo, and because there's really no other word to say to signify how people do feel about things like astrology and the metaphysics. And again, it's just a tool. Just like tarot is a tool, just like anything else is a tool. It's a way to help you interpret the world around you. And it's something that can be fun, and it's something that you can take into consideration or you cannot. Your life existed outside of this and will continue to exist on. But you don't know how the knowledge of something that you maybe shunned in the past could have a positive effect on your life, even if it's just a deeper understanding of who you are and why you are the way that you are. Because I'm constantly trying to understand myself, my brain, the way that I think, the way that I act, because I know that I often feel very different from other people. I often think very different than other people. And that's not to be like, oh my God, I'm saying, but
she's not like other girls.
I'm not like, I hate that.
I know.
But it's more to just try to understand my own thoughts, my own emotions about things, so that I can live life better and help myself. Because there's nothing more frustrating than doing something and not understanding why you're doing it. Or having a certain emotion and not being able to interpret it or figure out where it's coming from. And there are many different tools to do that. Astrology can be one of them. You just never know. I know that it's helped me feel more seen as a person. I've definitely talked about how my Virgo-ness affects certain aspects of my personality, the decisions that I've made. And I very much do believe that because it rings true to me. Like, the evidence is in my life. The evidence is in who I am and the actions that I take. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, you're like this, this, and this, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I am. Yeah, it's because of this. I'm not going to just be like, whatever. You know, I'm going to be open to understanding how did they come to this conclusion. Definitely test it out. Do your own research. We will always encourage you to do your own research, to look at everything with a critical mind, to never just take anything at face value. Like, that is the antithesis of who we are as people. We don't want to be people that are like, just believe. We did that.
Yeah,
before.
we did.
We're never going back to just believe.
And we're not going to ever, because of that, encourage others to do the same.
No. So all that to say, let's get to the call of action. For our listeners, for our viewers, what is your relationship with astrology? If you have a relationship, do you believe that there's more to it than what we are currently seeing in the media? Or do you think it's just like a fun thing, but not to be taken seriously? Or do you have no relationship with astrology at all, and a lot of things that you heard today were news to you? Because let me tell you, a lot of it was news to me too. So definitely on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and Threads. If you want to let us know what your feelings around astrology are, if it's something that you're interested in, something that you just kind of like, whatever, it's not for me. We would love to hear from you. We're always engaging with people in the comments section, especially on TikTok. So we see your comments, we respond to your comments, and we appreciate your comments. And as always, Desiree, take it away.
So friends, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, as Heather said in the video, if you are on YouTube. If you are on a podcast platform, also be sure to follow us. And more importantly, if you can leave us a review, that would be fantastic. That does a lot for the algorithm to help others find us. So all that to say, hope you guys strapped in.
We are going to be doing other deep dives that have to do with astrology. So if you are an earth sign, air sign, fire, water, you will have your time.
So
we will be doing, so keep an eye out for that.
Yes, this was just like a nice foundational chapter 1 of that. So get ready. And until next time, friends. Bye.
Bye.